Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. Ryan here with a tentatively somewhat brief, heavy reflection on the topic of down-tuned guitars. And this is once again brought to you by the lovely YouTube comment section, the best comments out there on the internet. I've gotten some replies, I've seen some replies on other channels, a few of which are simply curious, others are downright awful, but that's just part of the course for this godforsaken video platform. So regardless, I wanted to touch on this stigma that apparently exists with some musicians when it comes to the tuning of 6, 7, and sometimes 8-string instruments. And I first became aware of this when I started releasing my original EP recently. I've seen touches of this on other videos as well if I'm playing 7 or 8-string material, but I never really connected it with the tuning itself, more so the style of music that I was playing, and that's going to play into this discussion today. This anti-down-tune sentiment that I'm talking about ranges from extremely benign in the terms of maybe someone saying, I generally don't prefer music with down-tuned guitars, but I think this is a cool song. I've got a couple comments like that actually recently, very much appreciated, and you're totally entitled to your opinion as far as that goes. There's general things about, say, EDM music that I don't like. It's just the way it is. And then it ranges all the way to the nasty side of some people saying, if you don't play an E440 with a specific set of pickups through a specific set of gear and your vocalist can't hit a perfect 4 octaves, then you are trash and shouldn't be allowed to make music. I seriously doubt I'll be able to convince anyone who holds that belief, so I'm not talking to those people. It's just a lost cause. But for those of you that maybe hold opinions closer to the center of this whole spectrum we're talking about here, then I'd like to make a case for why I think down-tuned guitars are perfectly acceptable and I think the way forward. And not even down-tuned specifically, just different tunings. So to give you some background on my guitar playing, I actually started playing music with saxophone in a band. I mean, I'm a band dork, don't I look the part? But when I picked up guitar, the first things I tried to learn were transposing some of those saxophone parts and seeing, oh, well, maybe I can apply those same semitone, full notes, harmony type concepts to guitar playing, and that'll make me better at that. What I quickly found, though, was that saxophone is in weird tuning. So you've got like concert tunings where a G on a saxophone isn't the same thing as a G on a trumpet, which isn't the same thing as a G on a French horn. So I had to start thinking in, okay, I need to play in concert B flats. Well, a B flat's a first fret on a 6-string guitar on the A string. And then if you start playing in jazz band and you play in these concert tunings, things can become a pain in the ass. So what I quickly learned was, screw that. I'm either going to tune up a half step or tune down a half step depending on the song, and that'll make fretting a lot easier. Sometimes I'd play in standard tuning, but a lot of the times, say if we had a song revolve around B flat, then I'd tune down to E flat, A flat, D flat, so on and so forth, and it would make soloing so much easier. It would make these chord progressions much more natural where, you know, power chords plus a minor or major third, maybe plus a 7th or 9th here and there was a much easier thing to play. And so in that regards, it introduced me to, okay, tuning isn't this magic static thing. This is just kind of your bedrock for the song or for the genre that you're playing. Those early jazz band experiences made the less mainstream tunings for me far more accessible, like those that you would find on some of my favorite Van Halen or Black Sabbath or even Black Label Society songs. And I think it put me in a good spot to be more prepared for that earlier on in my guitar playing. And it changed the way my brain thinks about a fretboard in general. So for any guitar on an E string, you know, the 5th fret for me, that's A. It doesn't matter what tuning I'm in, that's the A fingering. But if you give me 2 seconds, I can count up and eventually figure out what actual note that is. But I understand why that may be weird for a lot of players. If you have been trained, if your mindset says, you know, this certain fret is always C sharp, and then you move down a couple or even further semitones, then yeah, it could freak some people out and, you know, put their brain into overload. So I understand that, but the way that I tackle the instrument, it's less about the specific note and it's more about the relationship to, say, the open chord or whatever key you're in. So with that mindset, tunings like open C or B standard for baritone guitars, or especially 7 and 8 strings in some variation of standard tunings, they become so much less hard to wrap your mind around. It's more of an exercise of, okay, where am I starting and what's the relationship between each string? And after that, it's really no different than playing a standard tuned guitar, except you get different sounds, which is the whole point for me. Tuning is a tool in the toolbox. It's something that you should leverage when you need to. And if the song or whatever you're playing works for E standard, perfect, then stick with it. There's no need to go beyond that. But that is the fundamental, I think, disagreement that I have with some people that are hardline, never tune a guitar differently. Not only is avoiding different tunings one of the easiest ways to cripple yourself in terms of expanding your guitar playing horizons or hearing new music, it's also a huge contributing factor to what I think a lot of these people are complaining about in the first place, and that so much of this new music just sucks. It's all derivative. It all sounds the same. Everyone's using the same gear, same recording techniques. There's none of this personality that you heard back in the analog eras. And, to a certain extent, I can kind of sympathize with those that don't want to tweak gear, that don't want to get lost in option paralysis if you just want to plug into a single channel amp and jam. I kind of get that. But then what are you left with? You're left with basically your instrument. So why wouldn't you want to expand yourself with different tunings or different styles? But when it comes to the creativity side of things, actually making new music and new content, one of the more common complaints I see, and I'm sure you see as well, is people saying, well, down-tuned guitars, 7/8 string guitars, they make everyone play the same. Everyone sounds the same. It's all 0-1, 0-1, 0-1 through a boosted, 5150 or dual rectifier. And I get where they're coming from, but it's misplacing the blame. They have beef with the music, not with the instrument. For instance, I don't like a lot of djent bands. I just don't. I play what some people might consider to be djenty material, but what they call djent in the strictest form isn't very musical to me. It doesn't have all that much dynamics or contrast going on. It's a lot of the same rhythms. Very rarely do you hear key changes in a lot of these songs. And so that doesn't do it for me. It has a lot of the same factors that make me not like a lot of EDM or dubstep when that was a thing. But I'm not talking about the instrument. It could have been tuned up to E standard. I'd still have the exact same problem, except, these down-tuned instruments tend to sound cooler. You can kind of get away with doing some of those more simplistic riffs because it sounds all right on a B flat or especially F standard string. However, for whatever amount of blame that you assign down-tuned guitars for musical stagnation or lack of originality, you have to equally assign that to guitars in standard tuning. You can't just ignore that too, because not only have they been in the game that much longer, decades longer than drop tunings and 7 and 8 string guitars when we're talking about commercial records, not so much in the classical game, but how many guitar heroes have built their careers on the backs of E standard, and if you want to lump in E flat and D standard tunings, then that list gets even larger. You can only strum a G chord through a Marshall Super Lead stack so many times without getting compared to Malcolm Young, or doing an E power chord on the 12th fret with P90s through a similar rig. You're going to sound like Tony Iommi. How many 2-bit knockoffs of thrash bands, especially Metallica copies, did you hear during the hair metal days? The list goes on. So it's not like this stuff is a new phenomenon. It's just this is the new flavor of the month. This is what people like to hear. Since the dawn of recorded and distributed music, there have been those that are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in their genre, and then there's kind of everyone else, a big majority of which are just kind of doing the same sort of thing, writing their own takes on similar riffs at the time, very comparable tones, but that has nothing to do with the guitar tuning. Whether we're talking about blues, classic rock, new wave, British heavy metal, they were just doing what was kind of in at that point. And what's in right now is lower tunings because it's newer. It's the cool new thing to hear. And it sounds good. Really great examples of down-tuned guitars are among my favorite guitar tones of all time. But that's just kind of what's in now. Maybe at some point it will flip back on its head. Maybe we'll have, 10, 11 string guitars that come to the forefront. Who knows? It's hard to say right now. But once again, it has nothing to do with the instrument tuning. So for those that are criticizing newer music because, everyone's playing in drop C or C sharp standard or whatever, and so it all sounds the same, they are willfully ignoring decades upon decades of music that did the same crap. They just have the leisure, they have the advantage of weeding out all the derivative stuff, only picking the best of the best from those genres, from those decades past of music catalogs, and saying, see what we were accomplishing back then, and you just don't have that perspective yet. So I make this argument to basically reiterate the same point I've made in previous Gears shootouts and even on this exact same video series. And that is to say, don't limit yourself. It's just so counterintuitive. There is no logic in sticking to drop C tuning throughout your entire musical career or lifetime, in the same way that it's not to stick with E440. There's just so many options nowadays, even with gear, with how many free VST plugins and how inexpensive all these tones are nowadays. It doesn't make sense to just stick with one amplifier. I mean, if you're happy, that's cool, but if you're trying to find new genres or just trying to get some cool new sounds, then don't be afraid to explore. And this is extremely pertinent to those that willingly admit for some reason that they ignore any band or any song that features a down-tuned guitar for reasons. I can't rationalize that. There is no rationalizing it. I mean, if you're going to tell me you're a Sabbath fan or a Pantera fan, you will just ignore some of their absolute best music in their entire careers just because they did this. Okay, so I guess in conclusion, that's my viewpoint on down-tuned guitars. It's another tool in the toolbox. That's really it. Good music is good music. It's going to trump tuning, gear, production most of the time. And my general word of advice would be, if you don't think you can get away with it on a standard tuned 6-string, then be cautious of it when you're down tuning. There's some things that work. You know, I think like octave jumping sounds cool on 7 and 8 string guitars more so than 6s. But, you know, in general, if you think it's boring on E standard, then it might be boring. Probably going to be boring on a B or F sharp standard guitar as well. So that's it. Any other questions, comments, please leave them down below, and we will see you next time. Hopefully with something like a tutorial or review more productive than this is. Thanks for watching. Bye.